Welcome to the Fourthstream podcast, where we are dedicated to finding hope. You can count on us to do our research and invite you into a dynamic learning process of authenticity. You can find lots of hopeful resources at fourthstream.com.
We've been talking out of the three different disciplines that seem to be converging in time and for humanity. First of all, science and knowledge, and kind of investigating what kinds of things do we learn from science and knowledge about where we're headed and who we are and all those different things. Second of all, philosophy and thought. How does engaging with philosophy and thought serve us, as far as finding a substantive and a meaningful life? And the third area that we've been kind of bringing into the conversation is faith and the heart, which is different than religion. I'm not a very big fan of religion at all, but I am a big fan of faith. So you can always know that I'm talking from that particular paradigm when I'm talking about. And, basically faith unlocks the heart. It's not that religion can't, but primarily religion only works if faith actually works in the midst of it. So that's the backdrop. Today we're talking about the idea of being mentored by God. And I wrote a book about this a while ago, and I wanted to look at some different aspects of it as we continue in the series that we're looking at together. Mentored by God talks about finding our way in a darkening world. You might not believe that the world is darkening. I personally do, based on what I see and what I've observed over my years. And as that happens, I ask myself some questions, because I want to move from here to there, and I want to be satisfied at the end of my life experience. So that brings three questions to mind that you can ponder as we consider this particular topic today. First of all, who has mentored you? Maybe a positive role model, or maybe an engaged, or both of your parents were really engaged in being your mentor and passing things on to you. And then during our lives, we bump into people who are a little bit further down the road than we are. And that can be good too. It might be a teacher, or it may be a coach, or just a different people that have a little bit more years on them and more experience. So that's the first question. Who has mentored you? The second one is a little bit more abstract, maybe hard to pin down, but it's how has God mentored you? So there are people who have mentored you, but how has God mentored you? And I found these questions to be helpful to me as I consider that. First of all, when in your life have you heard the voice of God? That sounds kind of really crazy or whatever, but I'm really talking about that inside part of you where you feel like you are connected with a supreme being, with somebody who is overseeing and guiding your life. And when that's happened, what has that looked like for you as you've experienced it? And in the midst of that idea of how has God mentored you, what have you learned about God? If you were going to give your 3 major points or 4 major points about who you think God is and what you've learned about how He works, what would that be? And then maybe one of the most poignant questions is, how do you feel that God views you personally? So second question, how has God mentored you? First question, who has mentored you? Third question, and this develops over a period of time, over a period of life, what have you learned about yourself as a mentor? When you think about passing on something to somebody else that's significant, might be a family member, might be a friend, might be a coworker, what are your strengths? What are the things that are uniquely strong in you that you have as a gift to offer other people? Second thing that goes with this is your intentions. What are your intentions toward helping others? Jesus talked about the concept that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, and it's a small seed, but it grows up into a tree that the birds of the air can come and find shelter in. So what are your intentions, my intentions toward helping others? And then finally, with that, how do you feel about your life giving shelter to other people? Covering, holding on to them, providing shelter from the storm. In my book, Mentored by God, Finding Your Way in a Darkening World, there are several things that I think are worth looking at. And in my experience, finding my way as a dad has been interesting. I have grandchildren now, raised our 3 children. And I'd like to just pass this on to you. This is on page 5 of my book, Mentored by God. When I think of my own father, I have mixed feelings. He was hardworking and he was successful. He passed on to me some great work traits and, along with my mother, a sense of family connection. I assume he felt he was exceeding his own father's achievements, but we didn't talk much about deeper stuff. In fact, outside of often being antagonistic to the point of meanness, emotional conversations revolved around hunting and fishing and whatever else we could make work. In short, I've had to find my own way as a dad. While I felt reasonably prepared for the work world and life as a male, I was ill-equipped for relationships. My values and choices were a mess, and I drifted through my young manhood pretty unanchored. And as I was somewhat likable and a pretty good liar, I did okay with relationships, but mostly I carry regret about my late teens and my early 20s. When you're a hedonist, the ends most always justify the means. This results in a very tenuous peace of mind and plenty of relational baggage. So finding your own, maybe your dad or maybe your mom, but just finding your own way as a parent is not necessarily something that comes automatic naturally to us as people. And that's one of the challenges of being a mentor and being mentored by God, is finding your place. If you're a dad, you're a dad. If you're a mom, you're a mom. If you're single, you're single, but single person. But find your place in life. Paul was single, and Peter was married, and Jesus never was married. So it's not like having a family and having a marriage is some kind of qualifier for spirituality by any means. So finding our own way as a primary mentor. And that brings up that subject. Fatherhood, I think, is the most ancient teaching. Now, when I talk about dads, don't think that I'm excluding women's roles or anything like that. That's not what I'm talking about. Fatherhood is the most ancient teaching, and what it is it's basically we are mentors for a brief period of time. And now I've experienced this as a father and as a grandfather, and as I look at that, I realize how many things that I have learned as a result of that. Our birth fathers and mothers shape us for better and for worse. And our family stories reveal our unique and unchosen paths to how we view humanity, as well as how we begin to make our own choices and shape our own worldviews. Our basic values come out of our family. When we then become fathers and mothers to our own children, we enter the role of primary mentors. Who we are and what we do begins to shape the soul of our kids. To the degree we provide shelter for our own children, as well as the souls of others, like their friends and classmates, we shape the father picture of another generation. So birth parents are incredibly powerful in our lives, and then if we are privileged to become parents, it's a primary role of impacting people that has huge impact and huge opportunity in it. Right along with that, the idea of generations is very powerful. And not only are birth parents charged with a huge opportunity and responsibility, generations also make their impact. All you have to do is read history to see that. Just look at who was whose parent and look at what their life turned out like. God is millennial father. He's there when every human is conceived. He is with us as we experience the ups and downs of our lives, and he's completely present when we finish our allotment of God days and walk through the door of what lies ahead. I believe that fatherhood is the world's most ancient teaching, and the impact of how we view fatherhood shapes our worldview. This has so much to do with our potential achievement of a satisfied mind. So birth parents and generations, a big deal when it comes to understanding mentoring and when it comes to understanding being mentored by God. Now, God's fatherhood is of great value. I think it's a reality, just like us being dads and moms is a reality, but God's fatherhood is of great value to us because it shapes our lives but it also shapes our destinies. And to some degree, human parents are a picture of that as well, but not on the level that it is with God's fatherhood. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that in relationship to time. If we're fortunate, we live about 80 years and we're completely bound within time. God is not. God is outside of time. Time is His creation for very specific purposes. This is why God's fatherhood is of such great value to us. And in this book, we will talk about how His fatherhood can, if we allow it, not only shape our lives, but also our destinies. And this reflects on the part of us that is our soul. You know, I don't know what you believe about the mind and body and soul and spirit and heart and all those different things, but there appears to be a part of us that is deep and deeper and kind of a collecting place for the major things inside of us. Well, that leads me to 4 questions that I think you might find helpful in your life. First of all, does God really have no beginning or end? If that's true, it has huge implications if he is outside of time. Second question, is there a God who's beyond our imaginations? We have a tendency to evaluate everything by going to the edge of our imaginations. Well, how does that impact you when you go into your places to think about and to talk about God? Is He beyond your imagination, or are you capturing and trying to make Him fit within your imagination? Third question, is there a Father of perfect love? First of all, is there such a thing as perfect love, but is there a Father of perfect love? And then if there is, how does He express His care toward His children, toward those whom He has created? I think that being mentored by God, the idea of being having purpose in the place of God is just really, really huge for us. And if we can get a hold of that, it can kind of help us with our compass as we head through our lives and try to find meaning, try to find a satisfied mind. Next, I'd like to talk briefly about the idea of friendship with God, because if all of this is true, and God is a mentor, and God wants us to be mentored, and He is really connected with us on a molecular level, if He's outside of time and He's calling to something that we can't even begin to imagine, then where does friendship fit into all of that? And this is on page 50 of my book, Mentored by God. It's hard for us to imagine any purposes where we're not the main players, the core motivation for all that happens. But even though humanity enjoys a central role as the image bearers of God, it is the glory of God that is being worked out in the cosmos. This is why we face such a challenge in moving toward the light. Being humbled before greater purposes is so contrary to our earthbound nature. So being God's friend is truly mind-blowing. That the God of all creation would be interested in me being interested in Him tells me a lot about the power and the nature of the living God. So I've been trying to contemplate that. What does my friendship with God look like? I mean, obviously, it's not the buddy, throw my arm around him, or hang around and talk about sports kind of a thing. It's quite a bit different than that. But nonetheless, it is truly a friendship, and it's something that I think is worth pondering, which is one of the things that I try to do in Mentored by God. That concept I was talking about a little bit earlier about God being beyond our imagination, I think is something very helpful to contemplate, because we are earthbound, we have a tendency to frame everything through our earthbound view. But one of the things that the God story is trying to do for us is go beyond what is earthbound and explain things in a bigger way, kind of conversations not only about the body and the mind, but also about the soul. And God being beyond our wildest imaginations is interesting. For various reasons, growing up in my family sparked a pretty flexible imagination. Nonetheless, I feel my ability to imagine and dream is a gift from my parents to me. It's that part of me always looking for workable solutions, even when none can or will be found. The human imagination is a powerful thing. We have the capacity to dream big, both for good and for evil, and everything in between. And one of the things I love about God is his unlimited ability to imagine and to do. What would it be like to think something and have it immediately begin to unfold or appear? Think about that. How would this impact my existence? And what would this ability look like in the hands of a self-absorbed or treacherous person as well? So I'm grateful to the one that has such power is truly good, seriously. And so when I think about God being beyond imaginations, and I watch my share of science fiction and Marvel movies and all the different kinds of series, and I see how men and women are trying to find meaning beyond the dimension that we live in. But the reality is that God offers us plenty of things related to that. He is beyond our wildest dreams. Look at space. Look at a DNA strand and do some reading about all of the different wonderful things that we're learning from science right now. So God is indeed beyond our imagination. Now, when it comes to our personal father story, because we all have one, and I wanted to comment on that a little bit as far as what we have experienced, because it so colors how we have a tendency to look at our Heavenly Father. Everyone has a story. Every story has ups and downs. I found that once I began to look for, understand, and appreciate my true Father, it became more accessible for me to reconcile my relationship with my earthly father. Did you catch that? I found as I became to appreciate my true Father in heaven, it became more accessible for me to reconcile my relationship with my earthly father. This was huge for me. And the more secure I became in my Father's love, the more I was able to be at peace with my own dad's fathering of me. So the day my dad died, he never told me that he loved me. But those last 20 years of his life, I told him often, and I showed him often. And that was because I learned how to express that from my Heavenly Father, not necessarily from my earthly father. Excuse me, Mr. Frog and Mr. Throat today. When it comes to our own children, I wrote a chapter called The Onslaught. And I'd like to talk about that briefly, because when you are, first of all, understanding what it's like for you to be a parent, or for you to impact the younger people in your life, or also that whole idea about God is parenting us and fathering us, and we're in an onslaught as well. And I'd like to read about that. We don't live in a passive environment. There are heart predators all around us. This has always been true. But in our parenting lifetime, it has become more apparent that our kids are significantly more vulnerable. Things are ramping up. And if you perceive that good and evil are on a collision course, then you understand exactly what I'm talking about. Our children and emerging adults are surrounded by varied and often destructive philosophies that find their roots in the religion of self. This is why porn is so insidious, beyond what was even imaginable when we were kids. It sucks up the oxygen of the soul. Love no longer means selfless care and concern, but what's in it for me? Lying is no longer lying. The truth is whatever we name it to be, even if there's nothing to back it up whatsoever. That's just your truth. You get my drift. But all is not lost. Parents can still be the number one counterbalance to culture in any century. And I pretty much looked at my responsibility as a dad and now as a grandfather as being involved in that process. To pretend that the onslaught is not happening is ridiculous. Look around you, open up your eyes, and as it happens, the idea of who you're going to provide shelter to. Well, how do you do that? You come alongside people. You don't just tell them, hey, this is the way you're supposed to live. That's part of it. But what about that appeal? What about that companionship? What about that huge amount of experience that you have that you can help the people that you love? So for me, that's kind of the story of being mentored by God. And I asked you a little bit earlier a question about how has God mentored you? And everything in this series so far has been oriented toward how do I unlock How do I unlock the resources that God has placed into the world to accomplish the kinds of things that really are meaningful to Him and meaningful to me? So how has God mentored you? When have you heard His voice? What does that look like? How has God spoken to you? Sometimes He does it through nature, sometimes through science, sometimes through philosophy as we wrestle through the philosophies of others, as we watch television and watch people's ideas and their worldviews unfold in front of us. What has it looked like for you to hear God's voice? And most of all, where from the inside, in that faith voice, where have you been able to hear the voice of God? And as that's happened, what have you learned about God? I've got a very specific picture about God, not because I tried to organize it or I read it in a theological book. It's because I've experienced God. I've seen His goodness. I've seen His mercy. I have a respect for His authority. All of the different things that are helpful to me in my life. And then finally, the question that I asked about how do you feel like He views you? I think God has a pretty realistic view of me. I don't think He expects me to be perfect. I think He expects me to be obedient. I think He expects me to be interested in knowing what He thinks and following it, but I don't think He experiences or wants me to experience perfection, because the whole nature of the God story is that God has come to seek and to save those who are lost. And if you don't feel like you are lost, or if you don't feel like you have that need, then the God story looks totally different to you. I think I mentioned earlier in one of our earlier get-togethers is that being mentored by God, is a picture that unfolds over a period of a lifetime, and it just becomes deeper and deeper and results in true connection with our Heavenly Father. Well, if that subject interests you, there's no way I can, in 30 minutes or whatever it ends up being, talk about all of the different aspects of being mentored by God. But that kind of highlights some of it and opens that question. When you think about God, what's your picture? When you think about your soul, what's your picture? When you think about your relationship, what is your picture? And have you given thought to what that looks like and how that defines you? And if that interests you and you want to go deeper, I think this book can be really helpful to you, because it investigates Jesus' relationship with His Father and the Father's relationship with us and all the different things that go with it. 120 pages, you can spend a little bit of time on it. I've also gone through and made posts on every chapter in here. So if you go to fourthstream.com and in the search, you type in Mentored by God content, this series of podcasts will come up, and you can kind of follow up on any of these areas that make sense to you. My goal is to engage and to pull together into conversation people for the deepest conversations of the heart. Anybody can live in a shallow manner. It takes intentionality to go deep, and that's what I'm inviting you to here at fourthstream.com. Thanks for listening. See you again.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. You can find posts and podcasts on tons of subjects at fourthstream.com, along with encouraging music which can be shared by a variety of ages. Finding hope at fourthstream.com.